Now, all throughout history, society has often viewed women as being the gentler sex. We often see them as nurturers, caregivers, and mothers. But tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on 5 ladies who turned that stereotype into confetti and scattered it all over their victims' graves. From a medieval countess who helped 650 young women check out early, to a modern highway predator who turned the tables on her male victims. These women prove that when it comes to permanently canceling your subscription to life, the fairer sex can be anything but fair. Now, what makes these female predators especially fascinating isn't just their body count, it's their methodology. While their male counterparts could often rely on brute force, these ladies turned murder into an art form. They used society's assumptions about women to their advantage, and proved that a smile can be deadlier than a sword. Some of these ladies chose poison and turned their dinner tables into death traps. Others preferred a more intimate approach, proving that not all angels of mercy have your best interests at heart. A few even made their male counterparts look like amateurs, racking up body counts that would have made hardened criminals do a double take. Today on Apex Crime Lords, we're counting down the top 5 most lethal ladies in criminal history. Now, these aren't your typical Black Widow stories of wives helping their husbands shuffle off this mortal coil. These are apex predators who hunted on their own terms and wrote their own rules, all while leaving their own unique mark on criminal history. You'll meet a countess whose beauty routine would make modern influencers faint, and a grandmother whose chocolate chip cookies came with a side of arsenic. We'll meet a nurse who turned her hospital into an express lane to the afterlife, plus a farmer who gave new meaning to the phrase, "till death do us part," and then a highway predator who proved that sometimes the hunter can become the prey. So lock your doors, check your food for arsenic, and don't accept any invitations to a Hungarian castle, because we're about to meet the queens of crime who gave new definition to the phrase girl power. Warning: the following video is meant for educational purposes only and should not be taken otherwise. Apex Crime Lords does not condone, encourage, or glorify the actions of the individuals covered in this program. Viewer discretion is advised. Keep watching until the end to see what's next on Apex Crime Lords. We're going to kick things off with a woman whose body count makes modern predators look like amateurs. Elizabeth Bathory was a Hungarian noblewoman from the 16th century, and it's estimated that she helped 650 young women permanently unsubscribe from life. And I mean, that's just the documented cases. Some historians believe that the real number could be even higher. She was born in 1560 to one of the most powerful families in Central Europe. Bathory had everything a girl could dream of. She had wealth, status, and a castle that would later become the setting for history's most twisted spa treatments. Her family was so well connected that she was engaged at the age of 11 and married at 15 to Count Ferenc Nadasdy, which made her one of the most powerful women in Hungary. But you know what they say, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And Elizabeth had some interesting ideas about maintaining her youth and beauty. While modern influencers might promote jade rollers and vitamin C serum, she believed in something a little more extreme. She would bathe in the blood of young virgin women to maintain her complexion. I mean, this woman took the phrase, "beauty is pain," to a whole new level. Now, who were her preferred victims? She liked young servant girls and daughters of the local peasants. She'd lure them to the castle with promises of working in high society. I mean, this was a dream job that instead turned into a one-way ticket to the great beyond. The girls would arrive hoping to serve nobility. Instead, they would become unwilling donors to history's most disturbing beauty routine. And I mean, the methods she used would make modern horror writers blush. We're talking about a torture chamber that would put medieval dungeons to shame. She had special cages built too small for humans to stand in or lie down. Some victims were covered with honey and left for ants to feast on them. Others were forced to stand in ice water until they decided to permanently retire from life. And these are just the methods we can mention in polite company. So obviously being a countess had its perks. For years, her noble status kept authorities from investigating the disappearances. I mean, who's going to question a countess about all these missing peasant girls? But now the local authorities knew something was up. I mean, after all, it's kind of hard to hide hundreds of disappearing young women. But Being able to prove it is another method entirely. Her husband, Count Ferenc, was usually away at war fighting the Ottoman Empire. He supposedly knew about his wife's hobbies, but chose to look the other way. Some historians suggest he might have even taught her some of his torture techniques. Talk about relationship goals gone wrong. The castle staff was paid to keep quiet, but eventually, even money can't silence the screams forever. Stories began to calculate about carriages filled with young girls entering the castle and never leaving. Local priests started to complain about the number of funeral services they were performing for accidentally deceased servant girls. It wasn't until 1610 that authorities finally decided that, hey, maybe, just maybe, all these missing girls isn't coincidental. King Matthias II ordered Giorgi Torzo, the Palatine of Hungary, to investigate. What they found in Castle Coctise would make modern crime scene investigators lose their lunch. When they raided her castle on December 29, 1610, they allegedly caught her in the act. But now here's where the historical records differ, on whether she was actually taking a bloodbath or just helping another young lady permanently check out. Either way, the evidence was overwhelming. They found one dead girl and several others in various stages of pushing up the daisies. But now here's where being nobility really paid off. Instead of getting the usual death sentence, which was usually done in public in medieval times, Bathory was confined to a set of rooms in her own castle. There was no trial, there were no formal charges. Just house arrest in a luxurious castle. They bricked up her windows and doors, leaving only small slots for food and air. She remained there until 1614, when she decided to stop eating and permanently retire from life herself. The official record lists 80 victims, but witness accounts and other documentation suggest the number could be as high as 650. Her story inspired a lot of books, movies, and metal bands, proving that even centuries later, the Blood Countess still knows how to draw a crowd. Next up, we've got a sweet old lady who knows how to put the fun in funeral. Her name is Nanny Doss, and she got the nickname the Giggling Granny because of a habit she had of sending her husbands to the great beyond, all while maintaining the persona of a sweet, cheerful grandmother. Think of her as Mrs. Doubtfire meets Lady Macbeth. She was born Nancy Hazel in 1905 in Blue Mountain, Alabama. Nanny's childhood was about as pleasant as a root canal without anesthesia. Her father was so strict it was almost to the point of abuse. He pulled her out of school after 6th grade and restricted any social activities that might lead her to having some fun, or heavens forbid, meeting a boy. So like a lot of teenage girls stuck in a strict household, Nanny found escape in romance magazines and Lonely Hearts columns. But unlike most teenage girls, she turned these romantic fantasies into a career of helping people permanently unsubscribe from life. Between the 1920s and 1954, this smiling assassin helped 4 husbands, 2 children, her 2 sisters, her mother, and her mother-in-law check out of life early. Her weapon of choice? Rat poison in the coffee. Talk about a killer cup of joe. And each husband's story followed a pretty similar pattern. She'd meet them through Lonely Hearts columns, and then charm them with her down-home cooking and sweet personality. Then she'd wait for the perfect moment to serve them their last meal. She was especially fond of special occasions. Nothing says happy birthday like a one-way ticket to the afterlife. But now what made Nanny especially disturbing was her cheerful demeanor. She would literally giggle while recounting her crimes to the police. Just picture Grandma baking cookies, telling silly jokes, and then sprinkling arsenic on some cookies instead of sugar. She'd laugh about her husband's final moments like she was sharing a funny story at a church picnic. Her first husband, Charlie Braggs, was actually one of the few who managed to escape with his subscription to life fully intact. He fled the scene after their 2 middle daughters checked out under mysterious circumstances. He was a smart guy. But it also probably helped that his mother lived with them and she sampled everything that Nanny cooked. Husband number 2, Frank Harrelson, wasn't so lucky. After enduring 16 years of marriage, he made the final mistake of getting drunk and then tried to force himself on Nanny. She responded by spiking his whiskey with rat poison. Supposedly, his last words were something like, "I feel like I've been poisoned," to which Nanny probably giggled and said, "Oh, you don't say." Husbands 3 and 4 were Richard Morton and Samuel Doss. Now, these poor guys never stood a chance. Morton got the special treatment after Nanny caught him seeing other women. Okay, maybe that guy deserved it. But as for Samuel Doss, his only crime was being too strict about her romance novels and TV shows. Talk about being a harsh critic. So it finally brought this lethal lady down. It was good old-fashioned greed. Samuel Doss's life insurance policy was just too tempting, and naturally, his sudden departure raised some eyebrows. When authorities exhumed the body, they found enough arsenic to take out a small army. And when confronted with the evidence, Nanny just kept on giggling. She confessed to her crimes with the same cheerful demeanor she used to serve up her poisoned meals. And of course, the media just ate it up. You got a grandmother who could discuss permanently retiring her family members with the same enthusiasm that most people reserved for sharing pie recipes. Now, you want to know the most chilling part? When asked about her victims' final moments, she described them with a smile and would say things like, "Oh, they had the blues. Just a little touch of the blues." In this case, the blues was enough poison to drop a horse. Coming in at number 3 is a woman who gives the term bedside manner a whole new meaning. Jane Toppan, also known as Jolly Jane, was a nurse who turned her hospital ward into a laboratory of death. She was born Honora Kelly in 1857, and her early life leads like a Victorian tragedy. Her Irish immigrant father was so unstable that he allegedly sewed his own eyeballs shut and shipped his daughters off to different households. Young Honora ended up as an indentured servant to the Toppan family, who gave her a slightly more American name. Jane's career path seemed promising at first. She trained as a nurse at Cambridge Hospital, where she was known for her efficiency and dedication. What her supervisors didn't know was that she was using her patients as guinea pigs. She would experiment with different drug combinations to see which ones could most efficiently help them meet their maker. Her goal was ambitious. She wanted to help more people permanently check out than anyone in history, and she almost succeeded. She had an estimated 31 patients taking their final nap under her care. But now quantity wasn't just enough for Jane. She was all about quality as well. Now what made Jane especially disturbing was her method. She didn't just want to help people check out. She wanted to control every aspect of their final moments. She would experiment with different combinations of morphine and atropine. She would carefully monitor their reactions. Sometimes she would bring them to the brink of death, revive them, and then start the whole process all over again. Talk about a control freak. But now here's where it gets even creepier. She would often climb into bed with her victims and hold them close as they took their final breaths. She later claimed that these moments gave her a sexual thrill. So much for professional boundaries. Her reputation as Jolly Jane helped her avoid suspicion. Who's going to suspect the dedicated nurse who works extra shifts and always had a smile for her patients? She even worked as a private nurse for some of Boston's wealthiest families, bringing her special brand of tender loving care right into their homes. It was the Davis family that found out about Jane's special brand of care the hard way. After helping the entire family permanently retire, that included the mother, father, sister, and daughter, people were finally starting to connect the dots. It turns out that even the most charming nurse can't explain why an entire family checked out within weeks of each other. When she was finally caught, her confession shocked even the hardened investigators. She described her experiments in detail and talked about her victims' final moments with the enthusiasm of a chef describing his favorite recipe. She claimed her ultimate goal was to help more people meet their maker than any other person in history. Talk about career ambition. Our runner-up is a woman who turned lonely hearts into stopped hearts. Belle Gunness stood over 6 feet tall and weighed over 200 pounds. She was an imposing figure who proved that the way to a man's heart sometimes involved a heavy object to the head. She was born Bernhild Paulsdatter Storset in Norway. Belle arrived in America in 1881. She came to America with big dreams and even a bigger appetite for both food and murder. She started off small, a few suspicious fires here and there, and maybe a convenient death. And of course, there were always the insurance policies paying out just in time to avoid financial trouble. Her first husband, Mads Sorensen, checked out mysteriously on the one day that his 2 life insurance policies just happened to overlap. What a coincidence. Talk about your convenient timing. And the insurance company just paid out without question. After all, who's going to suspect a grieving widow? But now for Belle, she was just getting warmed up. After moving to Indiana and marrying Peter Gunness, After she moved to Indiana and married Peter Gunnis, who, by the way, this poor guy met a fatal accident that involved a meat grinder. I mean, this is where she really started her business. She turned her farm into a one-way ticket to the afterlife for lonely men looking for love. And the way she did this was pretty brilliant in its simplicity. She placed personal ads in Norwegian-language newspapers and presented herself as a wealthy widow looking for love. The ads usually went something like, "Personal comely widow who owns a large farm in one of the finest districts in LaPorte County, Indiana, desires to make the acquaintance of a gentleman equally well provided with view of joining fortunes. No replies by letter will be considered unless the sender is willing to follow answer with a personal visit." So then, when these hopeful would-be suitors arrived at her farm with their life savings, Belle would serve them dinner and then help them write a letter to their family saying that they had arrived safely. Then, she would permanently retire them from the dating scene. She would then feed their remains to her hogs. I mean, here is one woman who really brought home the bacon. The scope and size of Belle's operation was just staggering. It's estimated that she helped somewhere between 25 and 40 people get a one-way ticket to the great beyond. Most of them were guys, but also a few women and children who got in her way. So now what was the exact number? It's kinda hard to calculate that when your disposal method has 4 legs and goes oink. Her farmhands later reported that she was always having them dig holes in her pig pen for trash, so to speak. And given the fact that each new hole just happened to appear right after a gentleman caller disappeared, it didn't take a detective too long to figure out what kind of trash they were burying. But now Belle wasn't just about quantity. She was running a sophisticated operation. Each victim was chosen very carefully. She checked their background and verified their wealth. Then she kept detailed records of their assets and made sure that each one had signed over their possessions to her before their disappearance. Belle's story ends with a twist worthy of Hollywood. In 1908, her farmhouse mysteriously burned down. Investigators found the bodies of her children and what appeared to be a headless female corpse. A lot of people believe that Belle had faked her own death and disappeared with her fortune, which would be estimated at millions of dollars in today's money. And sightings of Belle continued for decades. Some folks claim they saw her in California, while others claim to have seen her in New York. The truth? Well, like many of her victims, that secret probably got fed to her hogs. Taking our top spot is the woman who flipped the script on the typical predator and prey relationship. Aileen Wuornos became America's most notorious female highway predator. Between 1989 and 1990, she helped 7 men permanently clock out. Unlike the other entries who preferred poison or fraud, Aileen was pretty direct in her approach. She was armed with a .22 caliber pistol and a lifetime of rage. She worked as a hitchhiking sex worker along Florida's highways where she turned tricks into tragedies. Aileen was born in 1956, and her early life was a masterclass in trauma. She was abandoned by her mother and raised by her abusive grandparents. Then she was pregnant by the age of 14. By 15, and yet boasting about her skills. I mean, sometimes it was even the same sentence. Her capture was due to her girlfriend, Tyria Moore. She wore a wire and got Aileen to confess. But even then, Eileen's story wasn't over. Her court appearances became media sensations. She'd alternate between rage-filled outbursts and moments of surprising clarity about what she had done. In her final years on death row, Aileen became more and more erratic. She claimed that the police knew about the murders, but let them continue to make money from the eventual movie rights. She even claimed her mind was being controlled by radio waves. When the state helped her permanently retire in 2002, her last words were, "I'll be back like Independence Day, with Jesus June 6th, like the movie." Big Mother methods were all as different as their backgrounds. Bathory used her nobility as a shield. Nanny Doss weaponized the image of the grandmother. Jane Toppan perverted her career as a caregiver. Belle Gunnis exploited lonely hearts. And Aileen Wuornos turned victim into predator. Next up on Apex Crime Lords, we're heading to the mean streets of Chicago to explore the story of Johnny Torrio. This is the criminal mastermind who mentored Al Capone and built the blueprint for modern organized crime. From his humble beginnings as a bouncer to becoming the architect of America's most powerful criminal empire, Torrio's story shows that sometimes the smartest gangster is the one you've never heard of. Don't miss this fascinating look at the guy they called the Fox. Now back to our lethal ladies. Now what drives a woman to break not just the law, but one of society's most fundamental taboos? Do you think it's a nature versus nurture kind of a thing? Or is it something much darker in the human soul? Do you think female predators are more effective because we're not conditioned to see them coming? These stories also expose our own biases. Why do we find female predators more fascinating than their male counterparts? Do you think it's because they're more rare? Or you just don't hear about them as often? Or do you think it's because they shatter our preconceptions about women as nurturers and protectors? The impact of these lethal ladies extends way beyond their individual crimes. They've inspired countless books, movies, and TV shows. They've changed how law enforcement profiles female suspects. And they forced us to reconsider our assumptions about gender and violence. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. And if you like this episode, consider subscribing. It's folks like you that help keep this channel going. So now how do you think these lethal ladies will be remembered? Well, that's up for you to decide. Until next time, stay safe and stay dangerous.